doesn't seem that the God being wrongly described to them could exist. And you can see why, actually. You can see why. I can actually relate to that. It didn't make sense to me either. And it's one of the reasons I turned towards Eastern religion for the answers. And then you come across the great yogis and they say, look, you don't have to take this on trust or on faith. You can find out.
The Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence, where politics is not the answer, materialism counts for nothing, and spirituality will set you free.
Richard.
Darren.
Great to have you back. So I've got something a little bit different here. I've got kind of more of like a prompt. It's kind of pulling from a few threads that I've seen in different conversations. But basically the starting point is, do humanity need a new word for God to help people towards, greater realization of the truth of the divine? And I thought I'd just premise it kind of with, the straw man idea that I grew up with, because I think this might be what, where a lot of people get stuck with it, which is...
I never know what's coming. I literally sit down here and people might be... I have no idea what we're going to be talking about.
It speaks to your, your wide knowledge.
I prefer it, and I think it's more real, so it's good.
It's fun.
It's carry on, please.
So, when... the idea of God, put it that way, that was, described and presented to me when I was young, seemed to me very unscientific, very antiquated, something that to me I just couldn't believe that anyone in the modern scientific world could accept as rational, for it to be used as sort of a, people really reaching with it as a catch-all explanation and all this kind of thing, and to even be pushing over the idea that we need some sort of external accountability because we're so evil and, what's going to hold us in check. All these kind of ideas, I was like, what is all of this? They all got associated with this word, God.
Okay.
And it was only later, in discovering yoga and the yogis and, the way that they described this sort of allness of creation and their own experience of oneness, that I began to see that it was something different.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a life-changing, I'm not saying life-changing realization to realize that God was not what I had been presented with when I was younger.
Yeah.
And I just wonder where we could explore that a little bit, because I guess the question is, coming back to it, what if we had a different word or talked about it in a different way? What impact might that have on society and the discussion about spirituality and religion in general?
Okay. We'll say, and I'm just bearing out what you've just said, a lot of people get put off God, get put off Jesus, get put off various religions by their upbringing, and so the concept we have in Jesus is not God, and he's not even the one and only Son of God, but he's a great intelligence, but the concept, the description that we're given of him isn't the real Jesus as he really was. It was extremely forceful, extremely brave, a brilliant mind who could deal with politics, actually. He had to do that until he chose not to live any longer. That was a choice he made, but he proved he could. So he's a very versatile mind, and people don't think of him in that way. And when it comes to God, again, they're limited by this kind of human person, who seems to lose temper, and get sort of fed up. And hence we've got the end days. Here's the only place, and we've talked about this before, you can get a real explanation of why we're going into the new age and why there's a sorting. And this is generally taught in many traditions, why there's going to be, an end day, if you like. It won't be an end to evolution. People will continue elsewhere. But is the only place you find that answer is the Atheist Society that I know of. And so you're left with a sort of very humanized God who people are frightened of, and who can get annoyed and just saying, enough, you're going to have pestilence and famine. Or a God, I'm told that the Archbishop of Canterbury, in fact, he has said this, our current Archbishop of Canterbury, who's our leading religious Christian figure in Britain, has basically says he gets annoyed with God. So you get also this sort of, because he thinks God should be doing more for others and has words with him. Well, this sort of demeaning, sort of human being who's flawed, absolutely absurd. And there are various words, aren't there? There's Brahma, there's Jehovah, there's Yahweh. The best word that I know of is a holy mantra, which is where it's a vibration and a sound for depicting God. the word doesn't really matter. It's a comprehension of what it is and
Exactly.
a realization of what
Yeah.
it, not he, not she, but it
Yes.
really is.
Yeah, and I think that's a good distinction, isn't it? Because it's just that this word that we have here has become burdened with all these ideas, all these man-made concepts, many of these flawed ideas, and as you say, it's kind of put people off. But as in my own experience, if we were really talking about what it really is, then I think it would be a very different conversation with people.
It would, and people can realize, people can know God.
Yes.
And this is the big thing, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And as far as I'm concerned, my favorite book title always used to be How to Know God. It's a book by Christopher Isherwood, and I think with a yogi, and it's based on the aphorisms of Patanjali. But it's actually a liberating thought. Patanjali says, you can know God. You can see God. You don't have to have faith alone. You don't have to have belief alone. And you know it because I am God. And when you know that, then you know that all life is God because I am all life. And so it's a real thing. Dr. King attributed the motivating force of advanced intelligences to be a love of God through realization.
A beautiful phrase.
And this is what he said kept them, as he put it, on the straight and narrow. A love of God through realization, not just a love of God through faith.
Right.
They knew these advanced intelligences, they're actually from other worlds, but they were working in a very sacrificial manner for others. But what kept them going was this love of God, because they knew, absolutely knew what God is. And the interplanetary intelligences know that God exists throughout the universe. They know the galaxy, they travel the galaxy, and they know that that is a living form as well. And they know it's all living. It goes beyond the old yogis, actually, who would say, that all life is consciousness, but they know more. They know about the intelligences that exist throughout the universe, and that's a very, very different thing. And the highest concept of God, actually, up to now anyway, was the sun, and it's a logical one. It's a creative force without which we wouldn't be existing at all. We wouldn't even have bodies. We wouldn't have life. So it's a very logical thing to worship the sun. Much greater thing to do than to worship any particular master, no matter how great that master is, and they should be revered, the great masters. The sun, even much greater. So quite natural for Brahma, for God, to be perceived as being the sun. It's stated actually in here, in the Nine Freedoms, that this is what God really was to the ancient scribes, I think is the phrase. I have to check the exact text there. But now we can go even beyond that, even beyond the sun, to even higher intelligences. Once you start to realize what God really is and what it's sacrificing, you develop a great love for it. Once you realize that the galaxy, and we're going into some vast concepts here, but this is real, this is God, doesn't even have to manifest, but is manifesting so that we can gain experience, and sacrificing, feeling pain so that we can gain experience. What can you do other than love it? And owe it everything, actually. And so you develop this real love for God. And as I said right at the beginning, of course, you realize it through the I am presence within us all.
I think that's a beautiful way to go deeper into what God really is and what we can begin to realize for ourselves, because it can often get stuck in a sort of debate, can't it? No, God's this, God's that. Talking about it as almost an intellectual concept that has been just invented by us, but it's not. It was something that's not just always been there. It was there even before anything was there. And I find a lot of, as you say, liberation, I think is the word you used before, that we can all know God. And that, the example you gave of them, is the love of God through realization that motivated them, because it just seems like if we did begin to have more of this realization, the way that we think, the way that we act would completely change on earth. We wouldn't be relying on just a moral code, which is good, of course, that we have one, but it'd be more this inner light shining through everything that we thought and did, because we have this, not just a greater concept of God, but a greater realization of it for ourselves. And so it's no longer about this word that's, been disformed or disfigured even by, false teachings and things. It's more about this inner realization of it and ourselves as that. And, what world could we be living in if that was more the case?
Yeah, and you get the imponderables with the most people's description of God, and and the big imponderable is this almighty force. Why can do whatever it needs to do. Why on earth isn't it helping people more?
Yeah.
And you get the Archbishop of Canterbury saying that. Why is it allowing people to be born into these terrible abusive situations and et cetera, and poverty, and little babies who are apparently completely innocent, and so on? Why are they being allowed to suffer, et cetera, et cetera? And those are imponderables that it's not good enough. Sorry, it won't do just to say, well, God moves in mysterious ways. That's not a good, it does, but that's not enough. You've got to be able to answer that. It's only when you start to begin to appreciate the value of experience. You can't judge. I can't judge why it is some people have horrendous experiences, but on some level, this is part of the fabric of evolution. It's in terms of the eons of time and existence, a jot in the ocean. It's just, but that doesn't diminish it in any way at all. But God is above and beyond all this. I must say, when you get into a state, and I only claim to have dipped my toe in the ocean of samadhi. I don't claim, I'm not an adept, I'm not a master, I'm not an enlightened person. I've had an enlightened state, and a lot of people don't know what an enlightened state is, and some of the nonsense that's out there that's called enlightenment, which isn't anywhere near. It might be a great peaceful thing, might be a coping mechanism, but it's not enlightenment. But you start to do what actually I suddenly realized, that the words that Dr. King used to describe the difference between meditation and what he called contemplation is that you start to know the why in an almost abstract sense. That's exactly it. And because in that state you're not thinking, you're knowing, you do know at that point why it is that a hedgehog has to exist in the way it is. Why it is even that what we would think of as a bad person is going through a cycle of behaving badly, inverted commas. It doesn't justify it, but you can see it is necessary until they learn. You can see that in an abstract way that you can't really describe. But suddenly you realize the wonder of God and of karma, which is God. It's God's law, working itself out in myriad ways, and all through the grace of God, manifesting in its various forms, including as galaxies. People look up at the sky and they say, oh, there's, or they don't look up, but they detect in the sky a bunch of planets, a bunch of suns, and think, oh, let's call that a galaxy because they're all together. We don't know how they're holding together. We'll have to invent a word. Oh, I know, dark matter, because we can't understand. They shouldn't be holding together, but they are. They're holding together because God is holding them together through the magnetic body of the galaxy, which it is. That's a simple explanation, and it's something that you can start to realize.
Yeah, no, I think, and just going back to one of your earlier points as well, I think it's a very common sort of atheist argument to sort of blame God and ask why does God allow a lot of these things to happen, without realizing these more profound nuances of reality and the way that and the nature of evolution and why we're here, as you say, going into the more abstract why of creation in the first place. And when I feel that, and this is something for everybody who's on the path, I think it takes, as we see in the Nine Freedoms, a degree of bravery to begin to even look and question in your mind, what is God, and what does that mean that I am, as you start to take steps on the spiritual path. And I think it's a very cowardly thing even to not really explore what God is, because it's very easy to argue about it in an intellectual way and to argue about it with people who don't know God. But it'd be a very different thing to stand in front of a realized yogi and try to claim that God is non-existent. And
I'm sure it's happened, but
they could try.
They don't know. Though.
Yeah.
Then that's where they go wrong, I think.
Yeah.
People say, no, God doesn't exist. They don't know. It doesn't seem to them, it doesn't seem that the God they've heard of,
yes,
which has been wrongly described to
them,
could exist.
Yes.
And you can see why, actually. Yeah. You can see why. Yeah. I can actually relate to that.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense to me either. And it's one of the reasons I turned towards Eastern religion for the answers. And then you come across the great yogis and they say, look, you don't have to take this on trust or on faith, you can find out. And the beautiful thing is, you can find out through service. Through service. That really does work. And it's a really great path. Because one thing service does is to transmute the basic obstacles to enlightenment.
Okay.
If you go down a lot of paths, and if, for example, the Zen path, or what I know of it, and some of the others, you'll find quite elaborate, almost convoluted attempts to keep you in that enlightened state all the time. If your focus is on service, that actually isn't your priority a lot of the time, being in an enlightened state.
I see.
Your priority becomes helping others. That's what God does.
Exactly.
God doesn't stay in its unmanifested state.
Exactly.
It manifests as a galaxy to enable life to evolve. So that's the pattern. That's the God pattern. So through service, though, although your motive is to help others, and it won't work if it isn't, you will be burning up those obstacles, what they would have called samskaras. And it seems very strange to me that some of the old yogis who knew about samskaras nevertheless devised elaborate ways of trying to deal with them, go beyond them, transmigrate away from them, and didn't see that the way to really transmute them is through service.
Yeah, I think, as you're talking there and just having so many thoughts and just realizing it's not even that we're emulating God on a micro level, it's that we are becoming more of an expression of what God is in the fact that we are serving others. And, just to bring it back to your other point, it's, for me, it's the alternative to someone trying to explain what God is and getting it wrong is not giving another explanation. It's offering people the truth that they can realize God for themselves. And I think that's the most inspiring part of it, because it's not just trying to offer people another dogma, which is part of the problem with all of this. It's offering people the liberation of self-realization and the understanding of what God is for themselves.
Absolutely, we are or should all, and we will all at some point be striving for self-realization. But one of the great things that you find in the 9 freedoms is that what you do after you've had that realization.
Yes,
and if you go by the greatest intelligences in this solar system, the highest of the 9 freedoms, solar existence, they will enter galactic consciousness for the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of our years. But with a view, they come out able to practice something useful to the universe, a particular type of magic or whatever it might be. They don't go, and they come out of it. They don't stay in it. What the big fault, if you're looking at some of the old, particularly Eastern paths, which I love, a lot of them don't tell you what you do afterwards. I had an experience, and I only call it dipping my toe. Yeah. But I was actually wondering afterwards. Now what's it? What will it be like now? Will I still have desires? Will I still have? Yes, is the answer. Yeah. It hasn't all gone. The samskaras haven't all gone. Yes, you've got to. You know something you didn't know before, but you're still working your way through it. At least I am. And I haven't reached the zenith, far from it. So I want to repeat, I'm no adept, I'm no master. Yeah. But, yes, it's still there. But you don't come out of it for your own sake, you come out of it to serve. This is the total missing link in a lot of Eastern teaching. Yeah. And strangely enough, I think it put a great weight on their shoulders. Oh dear, I'm an enlightened person now. I've got to control this. I've got to stop that. I've got to deal with this thought. I've got to rise above that. They're full on, trying to permanently maintain this state of enlightenment instead of saying, no, I'm out of that now.
Yeah.
I've got the fruits of it. I'm not going to lose that. But now I'm serving. I was very lucky because I knew Dr. King very well. I was around him a lot. I spoke to him every day for 20 years. And he was a true adept, a true master, and he absolutely had samadhi right down, could enter it in minutes. He was the true adept, yogi adept. But watching him, he wasn't walking around claiming to be in permanent samadhi. If he had, he wouldn't have needed to discuss things with people like me, make decisions with people like me, and discuss various options and so on. At times, yes, he would enter it, and then he would know.
I see.
And he would know what was what. And but you're not in that state all the time because you're serving. And as I say, I think it takes a weight off your shoulders because of and the weight is taken off by selflessness, by the motive of selflessness. You're not doing it to take a weight off your shoulders. You're doing it so now I'm serving. As he said brilliantly, Dr. King, about a line by the Master Jesus, never again will I turn from my inner vision of you, which is in one of our prayers called the New Lord's Prayer. If you actually lived that, you wouldn't be able to move, says Dr. King. This is the exactitude of Dr. King. Two different masters, Master Jesus, Dr. King, both giving different takes on the same thing. Yeah. So therefore, you aren't in that state, as he would say, literally, of your inner vision of God. But, of course, you're manifesting that very inner vision by coming away from it and serving.
Yes, yeah. I think there's this amazing journey, isn't there? We're talking about there's these kind of Western ideas, and then, there's these Eastern ideas that totally open it all up and help people to realize that God is something you can experience for yourself. But now we have something even greater in these cosmic truths, which is giving us an understanding of service as the path to enlightenment, and also the whole reason that we're here in the first place.
And the pattern of God is to take all life back to itself. That's the plan, that's the purpose, that's the meaning of life. And what is the point in taking yourself to enlightenment, which a lot of them still strive to do, thinking once I get there, I'm out of it, I'm gone. They don't really think what will happen to these other people here. There are those who do and know they'll be able to do more for these other people here, but there are those who are just seeking that release for themselves into God consciousness, and they don't have a plan after that. They don't think a plan needs to even exist after that. There'll be a lesson for them if they ever get there. Actually, nowadays, I think it would be very hard to get there with that attitude because they're missing the big point of service. But when you come down, when a God chooses to manifest itself, not because it needs to, we need the experience we have. It doesn't need experience. It's beyond experience. It chooses to manifest, say, as a galaxy, but in doing so, it feels pain. It breathes, it meditates, it thinks. It's come out of that state into a lower state, and it has to. And there is the pattern. There is the pattern. Yes, strive for God consciousness. Yes, strive for samadhi. And then come out of it and know that you're out of it. You've got wisdom you never had before. You've got a deeper realization of God and a deeper love for God because of that realization than you had before. You're more motivated than you were before, and suddenly you might come across something and suddenly know what it means. Something that you've known for 50 years and now you suddenly know what it means.
Totally.
All those things, but you are not walking around in an enlightened state all the time, because that's the essence of service. And you wouldn't be much use if you did. If you're working, some of these wonderful, people do in intensive care and helping people in crises and so on. It doesn't really matter if your vibrations I'm not saying they are, but we're a little bit on the low side, or you're swearing, or you're bad-tempered, or you're pulling people out of the rubble. I don't think the person in the rubble minds too much whether you're swearing or not. They just want to get out of the rubble. You haven't got time to be thinking, hang on, what about my consciousness? Yeah. Can you just wait there for a moment in that rubble? Because I've got to get myself right first. Yeah.
Totally. I think that's a fantastic message to leave us with. That at the end of the day, it's service that we really need to think about. Yes.
That is God.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
Hey everybody, it's Darren here. Thanks for tuning into the show. Now, if you enjoyed that episode, don't forget to subscribe for more wisdom from the 9 Freedoms. If you'd like to find out more about the 9 Freedoms, about Mars Sector 6 by Dr. George King, go to our website, that's aetherius.org. Richard and I love hearing from you, receiving your comments, your questions on your spiritual experiences, and talking about them on the show. So do write to us, share them with us at spiritualfreedom@richardlawrence.co.uk. Always remember that service is the jewel in the rock of attainment.